Have you ever heard about the fateful night when Gennady Golovkin faced a real disaster in the ring? I promise you've never seen a fight like this before. On October 5th, 2019, on the legendary ring at Madison Square Garden in New York, a massive night of golden boxing took place, where the main event promised to leave no one indifferent, featuring two fighters from the former Soviet Union. It was renowned Kazakh Gennady Golovkin's turn to test himself against Ukrainian Sergei Derevyanchenko for the IBF middleweight title. Anyone who thought it would be another routine title fight couldn't have been more wrong, as that night the ring became a veritable stage that tested these fighters' ability to survive to the limit. Each round offered a new topic for discussion, but it's best to focus on starting from the beginning. It was 2018 when a 37-year-old Golovkin remained a living legend in the middleweight division, but time was undeniably catching up with him, and his potential opponents were becoming far more dangerous than the last. That year, Golovkin had already fought two major fights against Canelo Alvarez, the first of which ended in a controversial draw. Just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse, a second round was scheduled, only for the living legend to suffer one of the most bitter defeats in the history of professional boxing. That night, Gennady not only lost his titles, but he left behind his undefeated status, and something much deeper than that, inside him, broke. Either way, fate decided to give in and give him a second chance, one that few fighters in the ring ever receive, as he could now reclaim at least one of the belts he had lost. After Canelo vacated the IBF title, Golovkin was allowed to return to the ring to fight for it against a new opponent, Sergei Derevyanchenko, an experienced boxer who couldn't necessarily be considered among the elite in the sport. In theory, this fight could be described as an easy test for Gennady, but in practice, achieving victory could be much more complicated than predicted. However, once again, I'm jumping the gun. If you're not a fan of his career, you might be wondering who the hell Sergei Derevyanchenko is, and I'm here to satisfy your curiosity. Derevyanchenko wasn't just another title contender. His experience in the ring as an amateur revealed the nuances of a great fighter worthy of the opportunity. 400 amateur fights preceded his leap to professional boxing, where, in some of them, he won numerous international tournaments. Those for whom his name wasn't a question mark asserted that he was a tough, technical, and indestructible fighter. In 2018, Derevyanchenko had already fought for the International Boxing Federation title, losing by a very close decision to Daniel Jacobs, although many fans and experts in the sport still believe today that he should have claimed the victory. Precisely because of his past, when he entered the fight against Golovkin, Derevyanchenko was more motivated than ever. The controversial loss to Jacobs hadn't discouraged him at all. On the contrary, he had used it to sharpen his skills, becoming not only a tougher fighter but also giving him much more determination to achieve his goal in this second round. Derevyanchenko had been through a trial by fire, and he knew it was time to strengthen his weaknesses. Now, he wasn't about to let the opportunity pass him by. He was willing to do whatever it took to ensure victory was his. On the other hand, Golovkin didn't look at all like the living legend he was during the weigh-ins or on fight night. He looked pale and drained, as if his tank was about to run dry. Committing to the weight loss had clearly taken its toll on him, even though no one seemed interested in paying attention to that small detail back then, even though they should have. The opening round went almost as predicted. Golovkin shocked Derevyanchenko with a terrible right hook to the head.
Fighting on fire. He needs fire. And there's your jab in boxing. Lands over 30% of it.
It's over the 160-pound limit. He missed it just a little bit. 160 pounds, 170.2 pounds. Made it on the second.
Not long after, he opened a nasty cut over the Ukrainian's eye, making it seem as though the fight was on the verge of ending. A couple more rounds of this kind of back and forth, and the ringside doctor would have no choice but to stop the fight. However, anyone who looked beyond the surface knew something wasn't right. With every movement, Golovkin seemed to be overexerting himself to keep up. His mind seemed locked in a loop where, after each attack, he dealt with the frustration of repeatedly asking himself why that blow hadn't stopped the Ukrainian for good.
Be a bit discouraging, getting off to a solid start, then suddenly you're on the canvas.
To the surprise of everyone watching the fight, Derevyanchenko didn't let the cut become a bigger problem than it actually was. Instead, he turned the fight into something Golovkin had never experienced before. He hadn't experienced it against Canelo, nor could he have even imagined it against Jacobs.
Like Derevyanchenko was a little off balance trying to go under those shots, and he got caught in a perfect spot, just went down.
That's just what you're supposed to do. Back up the monster and go to the body.
Golovkin now, that joy to training, bring the joy to the ring.
Fight and to fight against Steve Roll. This is a guy that
Here's Derevyanchenko throwing hard, and yet look at the damage he's done.
From rounds 3 to 5, Derevyanchenko rallied and dominated the intense Golovkin, putting even more pressure on him. He knew the cut above his eye could force the ringside doctor to stop the fight at any moment, so he decided it was now or never, and fought like a man possessed by the spirit of the most erratic and lethal Mike Tyson.
Round right here.
Got everything going against him so far as he lands a shot to the body, springs to the side, trying to make things happen.
Derevyanchenko getting the angle on Golovkin.
He's going to work.
That jab.
As he hits him again in the right hand after the jab.
For every single time you go to the head.
You tear that cut apart with
The right hand. He's been very effective, and he goes to the head.
After his opponent's renewed motivation to prove himself up to the task, creating a more than evident contrast, Golovkin couldn't help but look confused. Everything was getting out of hand, despite his initial efforts to avoid getting into that situation. As the fight reached the halfway point of the scheduled rounds, Golovkin began to awaken from the delirious slumber he had been immersed in until then. The man who had been considered the favorite based on his track record was finally landing heavy blows on his opponent, even though Derevyanchenko's guard wasn't necessarily weakened. In any case, the Ukrainian demonstrated his ability to adapt to any situation, always finding the most opportune way to counterpunch.
Weigh in at the 170-pound limit.
Good uppercut by Golovkin there. He's still a dangerous man. And maybe the judges can as well. Derevyanchenko goes right back to work. He's able to block those shots. Interesting fight now. Everything is in the body. Golovkin is wobbled. Golovkin looks hurt.
From rounds 6 to 9, the fight finally looked like a close contest. Although suspicions were growing that neither fighter was bringing out the heavyweights, the forces were indeed evenly matched, and the path to victory for both had become a close race where any mistake could lead to their opponent taking the lead.
Here in the 6th. Good counter jab by Derevyanchenko. Feeling Golovkin will try to take it away from him. And now we go to work. Derevyanchenko breaks to the body again. Straight up the middle with the right.
Derevyanchenko worked as hard as he could to push Golovkin to the limit. Even though the living legend was doing everything necessary to keep his heart pumping, the Ukrainian knew how to unnerve him. Therefore, an epic comeback from Golovkin was expected, one that would put an end, after all, to the deadly dance they had been performing for the last 3 rounds. After all, since he hadn't been permanently stopped, his fans were still confident that the Kazakh fighter could pull off a victory if he could piece together the complex puzzle of the Ukrainians' defense in his mind and impress everyone present with an offense that would leave no stone unturned when it came to settling not only his rival, but also his very own figure from his past, the one who led him to the tragic loss of titles and his much-revered undefeated status. At the ringside judges' table, another real battle was probably taking place.
With his hooks, with his right hand,
Golovkin, he has never been,
the last 3 rounds, has had an edge in power shot. Busier in throwing hard shit that right hand, but he's busy. And when he's earlier on with that hard hook, reservoir.
It's incredible
that can happen.
That's what Derevyanchenko and Andre Rozier expected.
With the fight threatening to go down to the scheduled end, those assigned to select the winner saw a Golovkin who was often forced to take a step back, which rarely happened, and a Derevyanchenko whose guard hadn't been fully penetrated. From any angle you looked at it, this fight was turning out to be one of the toughest of the year, and I assure you none of us would want to be in the shoes of any of its actors.
You made was for G to start jabbing forward and using more of his defense. He's not using it right now. He's getting only adjustment we made, and now he got to just let his hands go more. And
that cut came from to make sure they're aware.
Golovkin take a big gulp of air. The head, Golovkin is wobbled. Golovkin fires back. Now with the right hand after a hook. Derevyanchenko fires back straight up the middle. 3 jabs in a row. Golovkin.
During the final rounds, which would be decisive in determining who would be crowned champion before or after the closing bell rang, Derevyanchenko delivered a final dramatic twist to this work of destruction by increasing the intensity of his offense. He wasn't necessarily comfortable in the ring with Golovkin lurking, and he was just as tired as his opponent. But the fire within him drove him to overreach in ways not even Golovkin had ever witnessed before. Now, the favorite to win didn't even have a second to take a deep breath. With this change in the intensity of the fight, the crowd couldn't remain indifferent and was on the edge of their seats, their nerves on edge. Someone in the front row exclaimed, "Golovkin is fainting!" And it wasn't entirely clear whether this was figurative, symbolic, or if he briefly saw the lights in Golovkin's eyes dim. But the truth is that, in any of these contexts, his exclamation could have been very close to the truth.
he has to throw
intense. What kind of reaction do you get from him?
Punches. The jab, right hand, straight up the middle. He's got a good chin. He's been able to weather a number of storms.
Many tense moments began to develop, where the fighters could go from being on the ropes to trying to break the other's advantage with a forced hook. Either way, they always seemed able to recover and continue taking over control of the fight's pace. The clock was ticking and the minutes were running out. It was time to bring out the big guns, but their own fists were already weighing them down. It wasn't just a battle of strength, but also of endurance and determination. A combination that can be lethal, but extremely volatile if you find yourself in both corners of the ring. His fans didn't lose hope, chanting Golovkin's name as they waited for him to become the Miracle Man, and somehow bring the fight to a premature end by working against the clock. The chants seemed to spur him on, and in the final seconds, Golovkin was seen pinning Derevyanchenko against the ropes before the latter charged at him again. The fight was still a possibility for both men, and now all that mattered was what was reflected on the judges' scorecard.
With DAZN has his own promotional company, getting into a long-term deal.
Alvarez set a bit of a blueprint that if you can take these punches, you can threat.
Important to note, final minute of... Again, this is a man who had 23 consecutive knockouts. Uppercut by Golovkin. Derevyanchenko has...
The entire Madison Square Garden stood to receive confirmation of the winner. There was nothing to be done. The final bell had sounded. Despite the cut and the punishment he had suffered, Derevyanchenko fought for the fight of his life, forcing Golovkin to dig deeper than ever before. After deliberation time, the judges awarded a split decision that honored both warriors in the ring. Despite not being the same as before, Golovkin was declared the winner. He knew this would be one of the toughest nights of his career and somehow managed to survive it. Do you think he's the clear winner? Let me know what you think in the comments.